Ahoy! Did you know that you can hotkey emotes now? Not the topic of the video, but pretty cool. We're going to talk about the flail. More specifically, we're going to talk about the weapon skill tree and all the different perks, because we can look at everything now, and there's some very spicy stuff going on here, some very interesting interactions that I wanted to look into a little bit more. As usual, with all this PTR stuff, this is going to be a little bit more off the cuff, not as much editing and everything. I need to get this out quickly. This is not going to be a full guide, that will be before the expansion comes out, but rather an overview of what's happening with all these different perks. So, we're starting with the first ability. You are probably familiar with the abilities at this point, but just to quickly go over it, we have Arcane Smite, which deals 130% weapon damage. You can see it's arcane damage, with a little bit of AoE as well. And it applies Impairment, which is a debuff that we get through all of the skills here, a very important one for the flail, because it does multiple things and it also benefits other abilities. This deals 10% weapon damage per second for 6 seconds, and inflicts weaken for that duration as well, reducing the base damage by 10%, and has a maximum of 3 stacks. So you're very consistently going to be dealing damage over time to enemies, and you're going to be weakening them. In case of this ability, in case of Arcane Smite, this comes with grit as well, but we'll see this impairment effect over and over and over. The first upgrade is Epic Flail. That's a bit of a throwback meme, I guess. But anyways, that's a 5% cooldown reduction per target hit, so a maximum of 25% reduction on this. Base cooldown here is 18 seconds. So yeah, you can get a decent chunk of that, not too bad, especially with a lot of other changes that are coming to cooldown reduction in general, and also some other skills that we'll see in a second. And here we have what I was speculating to be the case, Ironclad Superiority, the different perk depending on what kind of shield you're using. If you're using a round shield, then this ability deals 20% or more weapon base damage. If you're using a kite shield, Smite will now stagger targets, but the damage is reduced to 90% of the weapon damage. That isn't really that big of a problem. The normal weapon scaling here is 130%. However, a lot of the damage of this ability also comes from the impairment effect, or because it's over time on top of the other values. So sure, you are losing 40% weapon damage. That's not to be underestimated, but it kind of gets offset a little bit by the overall damage of the ability being very high. And then on the tower shield, you have a 30% fortify for 6 seconds, fairly long, when this ability is activated. There's a lot of fortifying stuff in general going on, but this is interesting, especially because it's in the Cleric tree too. The last effect here is Deflecting Frailty. Allies that enter the hazardous area obtain Deflecting Frailty for 3 seconds. So when they get attacked, they will inflict a stack of weaken to enemy attackers with a maximum of 5 stacks. So if you, for example, have another bruiser near you in a war, they will get that very quickly onto the enemies. So another 25% weaken here. Keep in mind this ability itself also has some weaken already. And I guess your allies can also just kind of run into this area that's left behind, this hazardous area. So they should be able to get this effect fairly easily. And I think there might be like, if you're playing like on a macro level in wars, you could have people like calling that they've dropped this and that you can jump into it and get that weaken effect. Additionally, when allies are hit, they also gain 10% lifesteal for 3 seconds while they're under the effect of this deflecting frailty. And you can buff this further, which I think makes this very interesting. It scales with focus, increasing the duration to up to 12 seconds. And at that point, you can very consistently apply this, I think, because, again, the ability comes with an 18 seconds cooldown, but it also gets up to 25% reduction from this, so in a big clump of enemies, you can maybe get like 15% off or something, depending on how close enemies are. And yeah, you have other cooldown perks, and then this only has this can go up to 12 seconds duration. Maybe if you're not going full focus, obviously there will be a limit here, maybe get like 10 seconds or something, but still, you should have pretty good uptime on this. And just another weaken that way, and some lifesteal for the allies too. We have Arcane Vortex. That's the one where you spin your flail over your head. It does 4 rapid hits, 85% weapon damage in a 3-meter radius around the player, and your allies get a 10% empower for 5 seconds when this is being used. I actually need to check like which of these allies effects, quote unquote, also apply to yourself, because quite often, like when it says allies, it can also affect the user themselves. And again, grid ability here, so you're not going to get disrupted while you're doing this relatively long spinning animation. 16 seconds cooldown here. The first upgrade is Flail Bird. Hitting an enemy with it 4 times, with all of the spins, will root them, immobilizing them for 1 second. So that confirms basically that you can actually hit a target with this 4 times, meaning the overall scaling of this is fairly high, but also you can't use basic attacks while you're spinning. So that's also, I guess. I think it's going to be very difficult to proc all 4 hits on someone unless they're really hard engaging on you. But in those situations, getting off a 1 second root could be nice. Like, you know, it's something that might be going into a graph well. But the more important stuff actually comes further down. So then you have accelerated advantage here. Hitting a target with Arcane Vortex grants a stacking haste on yourself, increasing movement speed by 7% for 7 seconds with a maximum of 4 stacks, so up to 28%. But much better is the second part, which is outright gives your allies a 25% haste for 5 seconds immediately without having to wait for the stacks, which I think is going to be a lot more consistent. But then we get to the really big deal, in my opinion, one of the strongest perks between all of the abilities really, especially when it comes to like war situations, but also like a lot of stuff really, anything that's not PvE, I would say. All allies within 3 meters of the player during the Arcane Vortex are cleansed of crowd control status effects, so roots, stuns, and slows, and are immune to them for 2 seconds. All allies are also healed for 65% of the weapon damage, and this healing is scales exclusively with focus. But the crowd control immunity also scales with focus, increasing its duration to up to 6 seconds. That is absolutely massive. 6 seconds of crowd control immunity that you can relatively consistently apply, assuming that, you know, allies stick close to you. And again, the cooldown isn't that big, it's 16 seconds, and there are more cooldown reduction perks that we can utilize. So a lot of benefit in going deep into focus here. Also with this perk that we already looked at, just a crazy amount of extra buffing and debuffing, and that's just insane. You can have almost, not quite, but like almost close to 50% uptime on crowd control immunity, assuming you're getting this full duration here. That is strong. Like I don't know how else to put this, but I think this is going to fundamentally change how many things in New World work if this plays out well. Because, well, if somebody throws a graph well on you, you just use this and go away, I guess. And then if they stay there, then suddenly they're the ones getting rooted by the Flail Bird. So, yeah, that's interesting. And then we have Arcane Eruption. Drag the head of the flail against the ground, causing an eruption of arcane energy in front of the player, dealing 125% weapon damage and inflicting 2 stacks of impairment for 6 seconds to all targets hit. Automatically follow up with an additional melee attack that deals 160 strike damage. And then impairment deals, or rather, this is impairment again, like the other perk had, that damage over time effect and the stacking weaken effect, or double stacking effect basically. What I want to point out here, by the way, is that you can see the arcane and strike icons now. We can always see the icon of what kind of damage we have. They did say something about no matter if you use slash, thrust, or strike, and I thought maybe this weapon will actually have all 3 damage types. That is not the case. All of the attacks on the flail are either arcane damage or strike damage. I'm not sure why they use that wording, but you're not slashing, you're not thrusting. These are your 2 weapon your damage types here. The first upgrade of Arcane Eruption makes it so that targets hit with the first attack are slowed by 40%, reducing their movement speed for 3 seconds. Pretty good, pretty decent, pretty strong slow, so no complaints there. And then we have the Supportive Blessing. The follow-up attack consumes 1 stack of impairment on the target hit, triggering a chain that bounces up to 4 allies within 6 meters of the player, granting 130% of its total damage as health to each ally it chains to, and 80% of its total damage to self. I'm assuming the 130% of its total damage refers to the impairment, because it consumes the impairment. So that would be 130% of 60% weapon damage, which makes it, you know, not insane, but it's a chain heal. It should be pretty decent. I am kind of wondering how they're removing the chain damage perk from weapons, and now they're introducing a new chain effect. Hopefully this one works a little bit better. I'm expecting it to work better just because it's an ability tied perk and not a weapon tied perk. So again, scaling with focus as usual, but definitely an interesting effect here. Though I don't necessarily like the fact that you're consuming impairment which you can get from other effects too, don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like this is the only impairment you have, but I think having the impairment effect on an enemy is very strong by itself. So depending on how I would play, depending on how I would build, I would maybe spec into this and not use this perk. They said specifically that depending on your build, you may not want to use some of the follow perks, and I think this is one of those, because you are still sacrificing damage and a debuff if the enemy only has this one stack here. Though, I guess you could avoid hitting them with a follow-up attack, but yeah, you know, you get the idea. And then we have Debilitating Extension. The follow-up attack extends the duration of all debilitate status effects, so rend, weaken, exhaust, and disease on the target by 30%. Again, a matter of how effective it is to actually hit the follow-up attack, but a decent increase here, pretty good value. I think 30% is within a realm of what I would say is worth speccing into at least. It's not a cooldown reduction perk like I originally thought. The icon was a bit misleading there, I guess, but I think, or maybe I just misinterpreted it rather, because it is a timer still. But yeah, this is a pretty good perk, I would say. But then we have one up here that has a cooldown icon that actually has a cooldown effect, so let's talk about that one as well. So that's Weighted Superiority. This grants cooldown reduction based on what you do in different equip loads. In Heavy, you get 1% reduction when hit or when blocking a hit. So basically, doing anything tanking related, you get 1% cooldown reduction. Kind of similar to a Sword and Shield perk. Not insane, but definitely a perk that you want to have when heavy tanking, because it's nice reduction. It could be insane, but the 0.5 seconds cooldown prevents it from being too insane. Then in Medium, that's probably the biggest one in my opinion, you get 5% cooldown reduction when dodging an attack. So this is effectively refreshing evasion, and refreshing evasion is no longer in the game. This has a 1 second cooldown, fair enough, but I think this is something that you can definitely utilize very well. In Light, we have 1% cooldown reduction when hitting a target. I guess this counts for both attacks, basic attacks, and abilities, with a 1 second cooldown. 1% cooldown reduction. It's at least in PvP not very big. In PvE, I guess I could see some use cases. But yeah, not the biggest deal, but also not bad to have. It's just a worse refreshing move, I guess, in a way. So, yeah. And then we have Oppressive Advantage. Though, at the same time, we can say here that it does proc, it probably procs off abilities, and that could be beneficial, for example, for Arcane Vortex. You can probably get multiple procs of that. And then we have Oppressive Advantage, abilities and heavy attacks, heavy attack hits against targets with less than 50% health grant 5% anointed and 10% haste to self for 3 seconds. I think like the haste benefit will primarily be from abilities and not from heavy attacks, at least in PvP, and in PvE haste usually doesn't matter that much. Anointed increases the amount of health gained when healed. Anointed power scales with focus, increasing its power by up to 20%. I don't think that this anointed effect is that great, to be honest. You have some self heals, but not that many, so this relies more on heals from others. I'm not sure if this will count for potions, because I kind of separated healing and potions a little bit. I'm assuming it likely still will, so that is probably one of the points where it's still going to be useful. So that, I think, would probably give it enough value to spec into. But overall, I don't think it's the best perk out there, because it scales with focus and increases the power up to 20%. So that's the maximum. So if you have less focus, then the increase would be lower than that. And at that point, yeah, it's just a tiny increase, probably. As far as I understand it, the wording here is a bit confusing and the layout is a bit weird. Hoping they kind of make that a bit clearer. Heavy Flails, hitting a target with a basic attack within 3 seconds of using an ability, inflicts exhaust, reducing the stamina regeneration rate by 15% for 5 seconds. Very straightforward. It depends on how much you really end up using basic attacks after abilities, as opposed to just ability spamming and swapping weapons. But 15% exhaust is good enough, I would say. It's like Warhammer territory there. I think a bit better. I think Warhammer's 10%. It's not insane, but just a little bit less stamina reduction. Not too bad. Spiky Impairment. This one is very situational, I would say. Being hit or blocking a hit from a melee attack while above 90% health inflicts a stack of impairment for 6 seconds to the attacker, dealing, the usual stuff that impairment does once again, with a 5 seconds cooldown. Now this is, I think, in some ways very strong, but in other ways not that relevant. I think well, the first thing is that usually you're not that often blocking while you're above 90% health, because you are above 90% health. You're usually playing aggressive and blocking a little bit later when you get lower. That's the first thing. But it actually counts for being hit as well, so never mind what I just said. So no, that's fine. You actually apply the impairment to someone attacking you immediately. The question, however, still remains, how often are you above 90% health, right? If you have a personal healer, then sure, you'll be above 90% health often. So in any PvE related content, absolutely, you will have this effect most of the time. And in PvP, it's a bit more difficult to say, I think, depending on how often you get topped up. But in most situations, you do get topped up often enough, I would say, that you can get benefit out of this. So yeah, unless you're doing like a solo build or something, or you're just playing OPR without a healer, I think you could get decent benefit out of this, just applying some extra damage and applying some extra weaken. Vital Embrace, while at or below 50% health, all Flail attacks grant 3% lifesteal when attacking targets. Again, this sounds like light attacks, heavy attacks, and abilities. And there's a maximum of 3 targets. I initially thought this meant like maximum of just 3 stacks, but I think it's actually, if you're just fighting 1 target, you're just getting 3% lifesteal. But if you're fighting 3 targets at the same time, then you get 9%. While above 50% health, all Flail attacks extend the duration of damage over time effects on the targets by 7%. Now, I think the lifestealing part is kind of lackluster, but I think the second part is very important, because that means you can constantly extend all of your impairment debuffs with this. And I'm assuming that if the effect itself gets increased in duration, then the weaken will likely also get increased in duration. So there's a lot of effectiveness to be gained from this overall, I think. And I think this is likely going to be a very valued perk. As long as you stay above 50% health, right? That's important, that you have to constantly make sure that you stay up, like topped up, so you can be as effective as possible. Leader of the pack. When no allies are within 5 meters, all Flail attacks deal 10% more base damage. Base damage is always very good. It's one of the ideal modifiers to have for damage output. When one or more allies are within 5 seconds, they gain Empower, increasing their damage dealt by 5%. Empower is weaker than base damage, because it's like a lot more risky to run into Empower caps, especially in the expansion when there's a lot more perks that give you Empower as well. And still a nice perk to have, of course, if you have multiple allies around. If you only have 1 ally around and you have a somewhat damage-focused build, it might be a little bit annoying, but hey, that's what you gotta deal with in that situation. And then the capstone on this side is Better Together. While within 4 meters of 1 or more allies, grant passive healing to yourself and allies that heals for 16% weapon damage every 2 seconds. I think this is a perk that you're taking just because, like, if you're going left tree anyways, like, you might as well. It's a nice perk to have. I don't think you're gonna try and deep commit to the right tree to get the right tree capstone if you are looking towards more left tree abilities. And I think PvP-wise, the left tree abilities have a lot to offer. I think there's a lot of potential, especially here, but also here, and also maybe here, depending on how you play. So yeah, I think Better Together is something you're gonna pick up, because it's just free healing as long as there's allies around, so why not? And now let's look a little bit at the other side and see what's going on if we're going more towards the tank playstyle, even though I would say that with these perks, a lot of utility tanking is absolutely still possible. Now here we have Barrage first, which is the forward sprint for 10 meters, and then you do a forward leap, and then you slam on the ground, dealing 30% weapon damage, and like while you jump, and then 80% weapon damage when you slam on the ground, and it also has a stagger. This is also a single target taunt if you want to catch a mob that got away from the group or something. You also don't have character collision while sprinting, which will give you a lot of safety in getting away, though there are possibly some even better options. So the first upgrade here is Defensive Rush. Hitting a target with any of Barrage's hits will grant a 30% fortify. The Fortify has a 2 seconds duration, and every hit extends the duration of the status effect from 2 to a maximum of 8 seconds. And moving through targets with the Bulldoze upgrade, which we'll get to, will also extend the duration of the effect. So, I'm not entirely sure how these hits exactly are counted other than the Bulldoze upgrade. My understanding is that it seems to be the hits from the ability itself and not hits from basic attacks. But I'm not sure. Or every hit that hits you, maybe? Not really specified. I will have to figure that one out later. We have Abiding Superiority, another perk depending on which shield you're using. It doesn't seem like there's any non-shield option, by the way. They did say that you can use it without a shield. I haven't found a reason to do so when so many benefits come from using any different type of perks, and there are no perks for unarmed specifically. So yeah, not sure what's going on there. Abiding Superiority gives you a bonus depending on shield type. A round shield barrage hits for 30% more base weapon damage. So that would bring it up to 110%, which is pretty nice. Pretty good burst for how much distance you can cover with this. And then the Kite Shield version, Barrage inflicts a 20% slow for 4 seconds. I think this is very interesting as well. And this will also slow target move through with the Bulldoze upgrade. So if you dash through everyone, again, we'll get to the Bulldoze in a second, then everyone gets slowed. I like this a lot. I think this is very interesting. Again, Kite Shield, unique in that regard. Tower Shield, Barrage gains grit while active. Now that's like kind of the risk with this ability, right? That you get stopped because it doesn't have grit. So Tower Shield offsets that, but you have to run a Tower Shield, meaning it's something that's not really open for more DPS focused builds, utility focused builds. You gotta probably go into heavy, but still it's pretty good safety that way. So not complaining. Then we have Bulldoze. Barrage can now block attacks while charging forward without consuming stamina. So you're really not taking much damage, especially if you're like gritting and heavy as well. And will push all enemies moved through to the side. And it will also cause the targets moved through to be taunted if using a Carnelian Gem, which I think is pretty relevant because it makes this taunt a lot more impactful. It's like mobs are running like around and you just rush through all of them and taunt them all immediately. I like this a lot. I think this could make for some very interesting playstyles. We'll see how well it actually works, but interesting one. Then we have Failure to Launch. Barrage attack now triggers a 2.5 meter blast of energy around the target hit, dealing 35% weapon damage to all nearby targets and granting Fortify to all allies within the radius, increasing armor by 20% for 8 seconds. The first part of this I was like, yeah, okay, this is kind of okay, but a 20% Fortify for 8 seconds, it's pretty good. I do think that's a solid increase due to the long duration of it. Of course, doesn't help light players that much, but I think we'll see a lot more medium anyways, likely, with how the dodges have been changed and stuff. Vital Suppressant. While at or above 50% health, reduce damage taken by 4%. While below 50% health, reduce the attacker's stamina damage dealt by blocking by 10%. Very nice, obviously, like a very nice safety net when you get to low stamina or lower health. I think this is a kind of a perk that you're just gonna take because damage reduction is good and block stamina is also good when you're blocking. Cured Flailment. Hitting a target with a heavy attack within 3 seconds of using an ability will cleanse 1 stack of any debuff from self and will also inflict a stack of impairment to the target hit, dealing 10% weapon damage, blah blah blah. We know how that works by now. This one I'm talking about before we go to the next ability because it's actually important. So keep this in mind. So if you use an ability and then use a heavy attack, you cleanse yourself and you apply a weaken, specifically, that's the important part, a weaken to the enemy. Because now we have Trip. Trip, swing the flail forward, latching onto a target, dealing 50% arcane weapon damage and knocking them to the ground. 18 seconds cooldown, by the way. We haven't actually checked the cooldowns here. 12 seconds Arcane Eruption, that's very, very low. Barrage 25, but that's also an escape, so that makes sense. But yeah, 18 seconds, Trip here, more of a middle ground. And the first upgrade is Flailing Duration. Triggering a target applies a special debuff to the target lasting 3 seconds. Allies that hit the affected enemy will reduce the duration of all damage over time effects on themselves by 10% per hit while active. With a 1 second cooldown. I don't know. That's a bit very niche. I feel like damage, depending on what damage over time effects you have on you, if you're getting hit by another flail maybe, but I think this perk is not that important. But the next one is why we looked at the other effect beforehand. Hitting weakened targets with Trib will inflict 15% rend for 5 seconds on the target, and granting 15% fortify on self for 5 seconds. So, what you want to do if you're opening up in a fight, especially like in PvE situations, is you want to use something else first. You do not want to open the fight with Trip. Likely you will open most fights with warding Bludgeon to get a taunt off. But that way, then you want to use a heavy attack in order to apply the weaken to anyone that you may not have applied it to in other ways. Of course, you could also do left tree abilities that can do the same thing. That way you will have this effect guaranteed. You definitely want to guarantee this effect because it's a consistent, well, not consistent, but it's a frequent 15% rend and fortify, which is very nice. You can also utilize spiky impairment. Basically, you know, you engage somewhere, you get attacked, and in that moment, well, as long as you're getting hit by a melee attack at least, you will apply the weaken to them as well, and then you can also follow up with Trip. That makes it even easier, and you will also get this 15% rend. And the last perk here is Destabilize. It's a follow-up heavy attack that deals 145% weapon damage. What's interesting to me here is this is emphasized as a heavy attack, not just an attack, which makes me think that this may utilize heavy attack effects such as Transient Rend, for example. We'll have to check if that actually works, but it makes it sound like it at least because it says heavy attack and it's highlighted. So let's see if that's actually the case, but yeah, it's interesting. Warding Bludgeon. Perform a spinning leap and then swing the flail down to strike targets, dealing 100% weapon damage. While leaping, trigger a burst of energy, granting a reinforced fortify to self and allies within 3 meters of the player, increasing armor by 50% for 8 seconds or until 3 hits are taken. This ability has grit. This is your main AoE taunt. This has an 8-second taunt within 8 meters of you. So this is what you're primarily going to be tanking with the side product here, or side taunt here being Barrage, effectively. The first upgrade is Stable Impairment. Stamina damage taken is reduced by 25% for 0.5 seconds after activating Block. This is actually interesting because it doesn't specify that this is tied to the ability in this particular part. I'm not sure if... I think it's just tied to the ability anyways. But, additionally, blocking hits while the Reinforced Fortify from Warding Bludgeon is active will inflict a stack of impairment for blah 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 blah. You know how impairment works by now. If this first part is already like a thing even without using the ability, because it could be, right? It says stamina damage taken is reduced by 25% for 0.5 seconds after activating block. It doesn't say this only happens after Warding Bludgeon, whereas the second part only happens after Warding Bludgeon while the Reinforced Fortify is active. And that might be why it's just tied to the ability itself. But this is interesting. This is a bit confusing. Again, I have to figure this one out. And then we have Best Friends. Upon ability activation, a nearby ally within 6 meters is selected and you become linked to them. While the connection is active, they gain power, increasing their base damage by 15%, and you both gain damage absorption, reducing the damage taken by 10% for 8 seconds, or until players are more than 6 meters apart from each other. Very important here to position properly to utilize this effectively and not get too far apart. The Empower, again, I don't value it that highly just because there are so many empowers in the expansion that many players don't really have to worry about that, but I do think that that with the damage absorption here, that's a very big deal. 10% damage absorption for 8 seconds, that is pretty huge. So definitely a perk that you want to pick up if you are in any capacity playing with other players. Let's look at some of the other caps, or like some of the other perks before we look at the capstone here. We have Reductive Superiority. Again, this is depending on what shield you use. If you have a round shield, then reduce it or increase the duration of all limited duration buffs on the player by 10%. So that would, for example, be empowers and stuff like that. On a kite shield, decrease the duration of damage over time and debilitating effect on the player by 10%. Decent at least. I think this could be like okay as a point investment. It's kind of vigor invigorated, I think, together. So I don't hate it. It's probably not the most important perk either. And then on Tower Shield, decrease the duration of crowd control effects on the player by 10%, so effectively a 10% freedom. Then we have Flail Marry. While stamina is at or below 30%, activating an ability will grant 15 stamina with a 5 seconds cooldown. I think this is a nice safety net to have. This is kind of similar to maybe like a Shield Bash, Shield Rush perk in this SNS tree. I do like this. The problem with it is often like the situations where you're below 30% in terms of stamina are also the situations where you maybe don't necessarily want to use an ability, and you might kind of have to hold on to your block for a bit until your healer is ready to do whatever they need to do. So depending, it may not be equally effective in all situations, but overall still a good perk. Then we have Mitigated Protection. When blocking a hit, gain a 3-second tracking status effect. This is super weird wording. Basically, this is a stacking effect, and every blocked hit extends the stack, and the maximum duration of this is 9 seconds or 3 stacks, essentially. While this effect is active, gain variable damage absorption based on the current health percent and equip load. In heavy, 5% absorption at full health, increasing to a maximum of 20% damage mitigation as health decreases. So at 50% health, you'd probably have like 12.5% mitigation. And the lower you go, the more mitigation you get. I don't need to say more about that. That's clearly very, very strong. Like, that's a consistent mitigation as long as you block a hit here and there. And the entire flail revolves around blocking a hit here and there. If you're not blocking a hit here and there, maybe you can avoid that if you go for a left tree build, but with the right side, if you're investing into this direction, then you're definitely going to be blocking, and you're going to get this mitigation very often. In medium, 3% absorption at full health, increasing to a maximum of 13% mitigation as health decreases. And in light, we have 1% at full health, down to 7% as health decreases. So this perk is not exclusively for heavy. It's definitely still useful in medium, but it's not for light. Let's put it that way. I don't think 7% mitigation is something I care about. But also, you're not going to go that far into this tree, I think, if you're going light. I think, well, maybe you could, but we'll see. And then we have Reinforced Vitality. Increase your max health by 25% of your physical armor rating when the flail is equipped. I think you get around 3k armor rating-ish now or something. Not really that impressive, like 600-ish health, 600, 750 or something. It's not terrible. It's not terrible. It's just some extra health from just at one point, but depending on what you want to spec into, like I would, for example, say take out this point, go in here, get your cooldown reduction, way more important for a tank build. I don't know why this one is so far down the tree. I would say it's not really a last row worthy perk, but that's fine with me. We need to put some points somewhere else. We need something to put in here, so it's okay. And we have Human Shield here. Hitting a target with an ability while within 6 meters of an ally applies a status effect linking yourself and a single ally to each other for 5 seconds. While the effect is active, the ally will only take 50% of the incoming damage, causing you to inherit 35% of the incoming damage they didn't take. Absolutely massive, huge absorption that way. I'm actually curious what happens if you're blocking. If you just take stamina damage instead, I would assume you probably still take direct damage, which honestly might be better, because then you just absorb their damage that way, and you can still block, and you can still get healed up for that little bit of damage that you're taking, so you like benefit more from like sacreds and stuff. It cannot be applied to targets that already have this effect, or yourself if you already have the effect applied to an ally. But yeah, great capstone perk for a tank-focused build, and overall a great weapon. Honestly, I love what they've done with this. Obviously, a lot of the descriptions are super long, but the effects are very interesting. There's going to be wild mixes in terms of abilities. I'm going to test a bunch, because there's a lot of possibilities here in how you can play this between different loadouts. Maybe we can make the light loadout work somehow as well. We'll find out. For now, if you'd like to see more expansion-related info, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. We have tons more coming in the next days about all kinds of perks, all kinds of effects, all kinds of items, everything, whatever you can think of. Other than that, if you want to get early trading tips for the expansion and support me further, then you can do so on my Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that. And thank you for watching. SLOTH out.